depending on the time of day you are listening to this. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode Ceci.
And now to Shane, and Kucherov gets tangled up. Play continues.
Someone's going off.
Yeah, penalty call is
Kucherov's got to be going off.
He is. Anderson's come out. Extra attackers on. Look at this. Ceci scores! Unbelievable!
Of the Unparalleled Success Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Woods. I am a radio broadcasting student at Algonquin College. I am losing my voice, but we're going to have a great show today because joining me on this episode is Brandon Maki.
All right, so my name is Brandon Maki. I'm a staff writer for Silver7Sens.com. We are a fan blog that operates under the umbrella of SB Nation, covering the Ottawa Senators. I was born and raised in Sudbury, Ontario. I'm in Toronto now, right in the heart of downtown, going to the University of Toronto. But yeah, I also host my own podcast called Internal Budget. And I've just I cover the Ottawa Senators for some reason.
I read your piece on Silver 7 earlier in the week, and Stop Ignoring the Elephant is what it was called. I thought it was very well written.
Thank you.
My favorite part was how you tied it together at the end, and Senators fans know that the attendance is an abomination. Trust me, they're not happy about it either, so help them. Keep the pressure on, write articles, record podcasts, do radio hits, and get it out there that there is no debate to be had here. So I really liked how you worded that at the end. And so here we are on the podcast talking about how Eugene Melnyk is the problem.
You got to practice what you preach, right?
That's right. The Sens have been struggling with attendance for a while now, especially since October. I went to one of the first home games of the season against the St. Louis Blues when they only had 9,000 people there, and it was yikes. Like, that was the eye-opener for me, because I was sitting up in the 300s and there was nobody else in the section. It was so. What sparked you to publish the article this week?
I actually included it right in the article. It was a Twitter exchange with Ken Campbell of the Hockey News and Shayla, or as she's known on Twitter, Brown Girl in the Rink, who I affectionately refer to as the Queen of Sens Twitter. Essentially, for those who don't know, it was Ken Campbell that called the attendance in Ottawa an abomination. And Shayla kind of prodded him and said, well, there's a specific reason for that, right? And he said yes, and it rhymes with Eugene Melnyk or something like that. So he wouldn't even say the name. And Shayla just kind of pointed out how ridiculous it was. And I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name if she's listening. But yeah, she just kind of pointed out how ridiculous it was that he wouldn't mention that, and he basically said, well, I only had so many characters, plus I think everyone knows that Melnyk is the problem. And I just kind of started thinking about it, because it did kind of bug me, but I wasn't sure why at first. Like, I kind of had to sit and digest it a little bit. And I started thinking about how, well, no, not everyone knows that Melnyk is the problem, because every day on Twitter I still have to see, oh, sell the team, move the team to Quebec, or whatever, So, no, they're clearly people that don't understand that there is a fan base in Ottawa, a very passionate fan base, and that it's a viable hockey market. So that annoyed me. So I wanted to kind of not so much be confrontational, but to kind of send members of the hockey media a message and say, look, like, you guys have got to help us out here. It's your job to control this narrative and to make sure people really understand what's going on. And if you're not willing to tell people that Eugene Melnyk is the problem, then you're failing in that task.
You do mention in the article that the on-ice product has been mostly fun to watch this year, and we're going to talk more about that later on with our 5 favorite moments of the season, and I chose the number 5 in honor of Cody Ceci, so we get that little teaser in there for the listeners. But what is your favorite thing about the on-ice product been so far this season?
There's a few things. I'm enjoying the balance. That's something I think we haven't seen in a while. More specifically, just the fact that these young players are getting a chance to succeed for the most part, that they're getting a chance to play big minutes and getting their opportunities. Like we saw Logan Brown playing in the top six for most of his stint. Drake Batherson's been getting some really good minutes. Eric Brandstrom was a top four defenseman for his time when he was up here before he got sent back down. So that I like that. I like that the focus is on developing the kids rather than relying on veterans that nobody should frankly be relying on. Beyond that, I've enjoyed. Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought for a sec. I've enjoyed. There's more structure. Guy Boucher's system was kind of run and gun for the most part. It worked really well in 2017 when they made the run of the conference final. But once teams kind of started to figure out, I never really saw any adjustment. Even after the power play got publicly exposed in that Uber video, they didn't change it. Like they still kept doing the same drop pass. So I'm enjoying that there is a little more structure to their game. So, that's something that's good in the sense that these kids can grow up in this system. And once they've, reached the prime to their careers, they're going to be able to, they're going to know it like the back of their hand, right? So that's what I really like. I just like to see a more complete team, I think.
And in addition to your thought on the power play, it's actually been heating up recently, which is good to see. And I like how you mentioned Drake Batherson, because I've got the Batherson sweater here.
I love it.
Ready for tonight. So how do you think, you already sort of mentioned how it compares to seasons in the past. Do you think, I was thinking the other day about how this has been a fun season to watch because there's no pressure. And in 2017, when they went to the conference finals, it was so stressful watching hockey games. Do you enjoy or prefer watching the games when they're in the tank or when they're doing well? Because sometimes it's fun just to watch with no pressure.
Oh, without a doubt, I prefer them doing well, 100%. You know what I mean? Like that's no hesitation at all. Part of the fun when your team's making a playoff run is that stress, right? Like that anxiety. You're excited, you're in a good mood, and then the game starts and you're just on the edge of your seat the whole time. I love that aspect of it. I think that probably goes back to my own days as an athlete where I kind of loved those pressure situations. The tank is fun too, don't get me wrong. I do kind of like the freedom of low expectations, especially after the dumpster fire that the last 2 years have been, where it's just been you want them to win, but they keep losing, and it just feels like this hopeless endeavor. But so I do enjoy how freeing it kind of is to not really care whether they win or lose. Obviously, we all want them to win tonight, tank aside. But and the fact that, like I said before, in a season like this is where the young kids really get those opportunities to shine. So they both have their merits, but I always want Ottawa to be competitive and playing for a Stanley Cup.
You also mentioned in the article the small, ever so tiny possibility of the Sens relocating. How long do you think the Senators could survive with Melnyk as the owner?
I don't think there's even the slightest chance that the Sens are going anywhere, regardless of who the owner is. I don't think the league, for one, I think the league knows that Ottawa, like I said before, is a viable hockey market. Like I highlighted the statistics in the article. They were near the top in attendance across the league for most of like the early 2000s or mid 2000s, I guess. But so it's really hard to just believe that all those fans have kind of disappeared out of nowhere. It wasn't like it was one season where they had killer attendance and then they never did again. Even in years where they weren't as successful, I think it was 2013, 2014 were years that I highlighted that they actually had pretty good attendance, even though they weren't a really successful team. So, and the other part of the equation is the options to relocate them aren't amazing for the NHL. You can move them to Quebec, which is a smaller market than Ottawa. So your hopes of success, you're probably going to run into a lot of the same problems, especially competing with the Habs. So, and look, there's always the chance. I don't want to never say never, right? But I don't think Senators fans have to worry about the team relocating.
And hopefully not, but if they were to ever, I'm not saying 10 years from now, but if 20, 25 years from now, you never No, and you can never plan for that far down the road. If the Sens were to ever relocate, who do you think you would find yourself cheering for, or would you continue to watch hockey?
I think I would always continue to watch hockey. I've grown up with the Sens. They were what kind of fostered my love for hockey. Yeah, that's a tough one to answer. I don't know. There are teams I like watching, right? I like Vegas a lot. They've been fun to watch ever since they came into the league. Plus, who doesn't love Mark Stone? Erik Karlsson kind of had San Jose growing on me, and now I really like them because they're going to get Ottawa a really good pick. I don't know if there's one team that I would cheer for. Maybe it would be an expansion team or something like that, but there's no other team that I love enough to cheer for over the Sens, or if the Sens disappeared.
And with all that being said, at the start of your article, you said it wasn't meant to be a negative tone at all, and it was positive. So sticking with the positivity, there's some very positive aspects of the rebuild going on right now. How long do you think until the Sens return to the playoffs?
A lot of it's going to depend on the draft this year. But if I had to put my money on it, I would say not next year, but the year after. So I'd say 2022 would be the year that they are back in the postseason. I think they'll surprise some people, squeak into a wild card spot, probably lose in the first, second round. And this is obviously, taking into consideration that everything goes according to plan, right? Hypothetically speaking. And I think the year after would be the year where they really start to go for it and start making a run. And like I said, it's going to depend on the draft. It's going to depend on ownership. It's going to depend on a lot of things. But I think just based on talent alone, I would say 2 years would be my guess.
Which player has been the biggest surprise this season for Ottawa?
It's hard to pick just one because there's been a few guys that have really showed up, especially lately. Marcus Högberg's been unbelievable. I don't think anybody expected him to have the stint that he's had in Ottawa, especially because he was struggling to begin the year in Belleville. Pajot's been completely out of nowhere. We haven't seen an offensive outburst like this from him ever. I got to go with Anthony Duclair, though. I don't think anybody at the beginning of the season anticipated that Anthony Duclair was going to make the All-Star team, and not make the All-Star team as kind of an alternate like Brady Tkachuk did, but make the starting roster of the All-Star team. So especially with the months he had in November, December, where he was just tearing it up, like he could not be stopped. I got to go with Duclair. I expected him to have a good season, but this has been beyond my expectations for sure.
So you talked about Högberg's play and how great he's been, and I was going to ask you to talk more about the future of the Senators' starting goaltenders and how you envision that picture working out.
Yeah, sure. I don't see Anderson being in Ottawa past this season. I don't think anybody does. I talked about this a little while ago on my podcast, but I said that there are people who think that trading Anders Nilsson is the best bet because he'll get you a better return than Anderson. And there's some merit to that, of course, because Nilsson is the more talented goalie, I would say, at this point in his career. Next year, I see it being a Nilsson-Högberg tandem. From there, it's anyone's guess. Goalies are unpredictable. Nilsson's really good. I think we really underrate him, and I think especially if you put a better defensive team in front of him, he's really going to look like a really good goaltender. Högberg, if he can keep this up, we'll see, right? Like it's hard to kind of take this as a measure of how his career is going to go, just because he's so young, he's so early in his career, and maybe next year teams will have a book on him and he'll get lit up like a Christmas tree. But Joey Daccord is playing really well in Belleville. So's Gustafsson. You got Matt Sogard over in Europe. I think if I had to put my bets on long-term options right now, I would probably think you'd be going with Daccord and Högberg, but we'll see. I think next year it will be a heavy dosage of Nilsson and Högberg, though maybe Daccord will get some games too. But I think at least for the next year, that's what we're looking at.
Tonight, the Senators, as you mentioned earlier, are playing the Maple Leafs. The first time I recorded an episode of this podcast was on October 2nd when the home opener against the Maple Leafs. One player who didn't look too hot in that game was Drake Batherson. He's in the lineup tonight. What do you make of his improvement over the season so far?
Oh, it's night and day. Like I've loved him the entire. I don't think he's had a bad game since they called him up. Look, at the beginning of the year, he kind of looked like a guy who was going, man, I really hope they don't figure out that I'm supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here, kind of thing. Like he looked at a place, which was obviously not what we were hoping for. But now he had the really good. He was dynamite when they sent him back down to Belleville. He's been the best player in the American Hockey League over the last 2 years. I don't think that's debatable. But the difference I've seen with him is just he seems to have found another gear. He looks like he's grown up in the time that he was down in Belleville. He's throwing hits. He's using his size. He's going into corners. He's fighting like a dog for pucks. But he looks confident. That's something that was missing in the beginning of the season. He's not afraid to make those nice passes across the ice. I think it was the Buffalo game that he set up Tyler Ennis on the power play. It was just a gorgeous pass. And it was a tough pass to make because he had to pass through a couple defenders. So for him to have the confidence now to be able to try those things is, I think, the biggest indicator that he's going to really have some success, especially when you consider that he's so young. Next year will probably be his first full season, and he's going to get a good playoff run in with Belleville. So he's just, like I said, he's just night and day from the beginning of the year.
So as you say, the future's looking pretty good for the Senators right now. One way that they can make the future look even better is by adding assets at the upcoming trade deadline on February 24th. Lots of potential unrestricted free agents and restricted free agents on the Sens this year. So I'm going to go over the list, and you can tell the listeners if you think the Sens should either trade, re-sign, or move on from them, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, so first up, the hot topic leading the list is Jean-Gabriel Pageau, pending unrestricted free agent.
They've got to trade him. I hate to say it, like it sucks, it bothers me, but they've got to trade him. They should have done it a month or two ago, frankly, because his value is probably even higher than it is now, just because he was so hot. Now, I still think you get a first for him, but if I'm Ottawa, I do it as quick as I can, and it's just because his value will never be as high as it is now. Not to Ottawa or to anybody. He's 27 years old, history of injuries. You got to move on. Get a first for him. Have 3 first-round picks in this draft. That's unbelievable.
One idea that I had the other day that is completely unrealistic, but I loved it, was trading Pageau to Edmonton for their first-round pick. And I've since seen a report that Edmonton is hesitant to trade a first-round pick, and they're not willing to do that, especially for Pageau, which would make sense. But if they were able to pull that off with a team like the Islanders or the Flyers, who are also on the bubble, and get an unprotected first-round pick this year for Pageau, and then potentially have 3 lottery picks, that would be outstanding.
See, I think if any team is going to trade a first for Pageau, it's going to be one of those contending teams, right? Like I think there's a good chance of Pageau going to Boston. Boston made a similar move last year when they traded for Johansson. And I said at the time, my dad's a big Bruins fan, right? So him and I were talking about it, and he didn't really know much about Johansson. And I said, trust me, that is going to be a great move for you guys. Like that's going to be a huge move for the playoff run. That's probably the best trade of the day. And Johansson had a great playoff. So I think Boston will look to add to that forward depth just because they're going to have injuries. They always do. Bergeron gets hurt. Guys always get hurt. So if you have Bergeron, Krejci, and Pageau down the middle, and Corrali on the fourth line, I would argue that is the best overall center depth in the league. So especially if they can dump the Backes contract, I think Boston would love to take him, and I think Pittsburgh would too, for sure. Nice compliment to Crosby and Malkin. He can kill penalties for you, play that kind of two-way defensive role, some secondary scoring in the playoffs. I think one of those two teams he'll end up going to.
Would you be all upset if they traded him to Boston and kept him within the division? That would sort of remind me of the Chris Kelly trade from 2011, but to a higher extent because it's Pageau.
I wouldn't, especially if you're going to get a first out of it. It's probably going to be a late first because I think if I had to pick a team today to win the Cup, it would probably be Boston. But no, because like I said, he's 27. He's had the history of injuries. His point totals were actually regressing up until this season. I see this season as an outlier for Pageau. I think he's still going to have an impact for 3 or 4 more years, maybe even 5. But by the time that Ottawa is ready to really compete for a Stanley Cup, I think Pageau is going to be I don't want to say a non-factor, but he's definitely not going to be as much of an impact player as he is now. So it doesn't worry me that much, no.
And especially if Josh Norris and like the other center prospects in the organization develop as projected, you're not going to want to give Peugeot that 5x5 or whatever contract it's going to take to have him be a third line center a few years down the road.
Definitely not.
Next up on the list, Tyler Ennis, pending unrestricted free agent.
This is kind of funny because at the beginning of the year, I was so over Tyler Ennis. I did not like him at all. He just looked like he was checked out to me. And lately, he's looked great. So I think Ennis is dependent on what you can get for him. I think anything lower than a third-round pick, and I would probably hang on to him. But as far as return for him, I think a third and up, I'd definitely trade him. But if you have to hang on to him, it's not the end of the world. He's a nice complement in your bottom six, right? Can give you some secondary scoring. You don't want Tyler Ennis usually to be your source of primary scoring, right? So I think as a bottom six guy, he'd be a good fit. But if, like I said, if you can get a third, a second for him, then you should by all means do that.
Next up, we've got Vladislav Nemesnikov, pending UFA.
I saw someone that said send Nemesnikov to Boston to take on the Backes contract and a first. And I would like that a lot, even if they just get like a second out of it to take that deal. Nemesnikov he's a tricky one because a lot of his impacts are understated. He's just one of those guys that's kind of just solid. You know, he doesn't do anything usually spectacular, but he's just solid. I think you're going to have enough guys in the system, I should say, that you don't really have to worry about losing him. So I would kind of play it like the Ennis thing. If you anything lower than probably a third, because they got him for a third, I think, right? So anything lower than a third, I would probably hang on to him. But if not, then I would definitely trade him, yeah.
And I was wondering about the David Backes contract because it doesn't seem like it was signed that long ago, but apparently it was 2016, so he's only got the rest of this season and then next season remaining on the contract with a modified no-trade clause, 15-team no-trade list. So I doubt as if he would want to come to Ottawa. Ottawa would probably be on that no-trade list, but if you can get a deal like that, then they would definitely take that in a heartbeat, and I'd be okay with that.
Backes is a guy, too, that I think by all indications he would do what was best for the team, right? So I see Backes as a guy that would kind of waive that no-trade list to go to Ottawa. But we'll see what happens. I think Boston's made it clear that he doesn't have a place there anymore. I worry about his concussion history. Truthfully, I don't even want him playing if he comes to Ottawa. I just kind of like to press box him, as bad as that sounds. But if Ottawa can do that deal, then they definitely should. I wanted them to do it in the offseason, truthfully.
And now for the forwards, we start out the restricted free agents with Mr. Electric Anthony Duclair.
Sign him. There's no doubt in my mind. Do not even entertain the thought of trading him. Sign him 2-3 years, and then after that, if he proves that he can be consistent, because one of the big knock in his career has been inconsistency, right? It happened in Arizona. Well, it didn't happen so much in Arizona, New York, because he didn't spend a lot of time there, but it happened in Chicago for sure and Columbus. So if he can prove that he's going to be a consistent offensive threat, and I think he is, then you should 100% sign him long term. But for now, definitely sign him. Definitely.
Yeah, I was only slightly worried about his goal drought recently because he's on like a 10-plus game goalless drought, but then he got 9 shots on goal the other night, so he's going to get one. And
yeah, but you got to look at who he's playing with too, right? They have him with Nemesnikov and Tierney right now, and that's just so not a fit for his game. I think it was one of Sean Tierney's charts that had him, that was listing all Ottawa's line combinations and how effective they were, and Tierney, and that Duclair, Tierney, Nemesnikov line was dead last. Like they're terrible together. They just don't fit well together. So what I would like to see is move Ennis down to that line and have Duclair play with White and Batherson, because White and Batherson have been playing really well together. They've been generating a lot of offense. Batherson's a guy that can feed Duclair the puck, and he can rip those shots. So that's what I would like to see. I think that's been a big part of it. So I'm not stressed about Duclair so much.
And speaking of the Tierneys, we got Chris Tierney pending RFA.
Everyone bugs me about Chris Tierney because I've made it clear how much he frustrates me. I don't think I've ever watched a more inconsistent player than Tierney. I guess inconsistent is the word of the day, but I think he's one of the guys that's frustrated me the most just because he'll have games where he looks like a world beater. Like, it's not even like he just looks unbeatable, like a bona fide number 2 center. And then he goes on like a 20-game goalless streak and is invisible. So you can't trade everybody, right? So I think if you trade Pajot, you have to more seriously consider hanging on to Tierney just because you can't have an all-rookie center group. You know, you do need some guys in there that are established and that we know can play. But at the same time, I don't think it would be the worst idea in the world to see what you can get for him. It just makes me nervous trading him or Pajot. So I think if you trade Pajot, then maybe 60% trade Tierney. And if you don't trade Pajot, 100% trade Tierney. That's where I'm at.
Next up, we have pending RFA, Connor Brown.
I love Connor Brown. Keep him. He's another guy who instantly re-sign. I said when the trade happened that Connor Brown makes this trade a home run for Ottawa because you dumped Ceci, you took on Zaitsev at whatever. It's the lateral move from Zaitsev to Ceci, right? So in my eyes, those two kind of cancel each other out. And then you have Connor Brown, who I think is one of the best depth forwards in the league. And he's going to be a guy who, if Ottawa goes on a cup run, hopefully in 3-4 years, he's going to be one of those key guys on it. Killing penalties, secondary scoring. Definitely keep Connor Brown. No doubt in my mind.
What would you offer up as a contract for him?
I don't think he's going to play for less than Colin White is making, right? Colin White's making 4.75. I think if you offer him that deal or maybe even go right to $5 million, that's a good deal. Maybe stay away from longer term, maybe like 3 or 4 years at $5 million if he'll do it would be good. But I definitely want to see him I definitely want to see him stick around. I think anything over $5 million, I start to kind of go, ugh, because if you're paying depth forwards, plus $5-6 million, then what are you doing? But that's where I'm at on Connor Brown. I think anywhere from that 4.75 in that 4.75-5 billion range is good for me.
And now we're going to move on to the defensemen, leading off as we've got so many former Toronto Maple Leafs that are coming up for new contracts. 38 or 39-year-old Ron Hainsey.
38, I think, or maybe I think he's turning 39 this year, so he'll be 40 next year. I like Ron Hainsey. I don't like Ron Hainsey, the hockey player, so much, but I think what he brings to the table in terms of IQ and leadership, I think he's one of those rare guys that's hard to find. I'd like to see them, if next year is going to be Hainsey's last year, I would like to see them re-sign him for one more year, league minimum, and then once he retires, make him assistant coach or player development, because even if you watch the games, right, when Brandstrom was up with the team, he was coaching up Brandstrom all the time. That's why they were on the pairing together. He's always coaching up other guys, even in practice. I think DJ Smith said near the beginning of the year, he's like having another coach on the ice. And then, excuse me. But from there, like I said, I don't love his skill on the ice anymore. But if they sign Hainsey for another year and then make him a coach right after that, I'm not mad about that. I hope he retires at the end of this year, but we'll see what happens.
Moving on, we've got coming back from the Erik Karlsson trade, fucking Wrights Mello.
Fucking Wrights Mello. I love Dylan DeMello. He's another guy who there's no doubt in my mind you got to re-sign him. Definitely one of the most underrated players in the league. He's been the shocker of this Karlsson deal to me. A lot of people have been kind of taken aback by Josh Norris and by Rudy Balcers, but like Dylan DeMello's been unbelievable, and he just plays such an understated game, right? He rarely does anything insane, but he never makes mistakes. He's so efficient. He's calm. He's poised. He's really good with the puck. If you can get that guy for a bargain, which you should be able to now because most of the league hasn't woken up to him yet, you got to do it. You got to keep Dylan DeMello around, especially for those Christmas videos. I mean, come on.
One of my favorite parts of that trade was watching Craig Button roast Pierre Dorian for the trade, considering how little the Ottawa Senators got back. The best part of that was when he said, Dylan DeMello isn't even an NHL defenseman.
I would laugh harder at that, but I called Tierney and DeMello fringe NHLers when that trade happened, so I got to kind of eat one there too. But yeah, that's what I mean. Like, DeMello, I think, has been the surprise of the trade. I still have a hard time stomaching that I cheer for the team that traded Erik Karlsson. But, I mean, DeMello is a nice consolation, especially if Norris and Balzers and that first-round pick turn out well. We got something going on.
And in terms of polarizing defensemen in the history of the Ottawa Senators, besides from Cody Ceci, perhaps one of the most polarizing defensemen, Mark Borowiecki.
I've done a total 180 on Boro. I must have tweeted at some point, fire Boro into the sun last year because I was just so fed up. But we've seen an improvement in his offensive game, or actually his all-around game. He just looks all-around better. And like I mentioned with Haynes, he's just a leadership factor that he brings. That's just a guy that's so beloved in the locker room and in the community. I'm of the opinion now that I would like to see them re-sign Boro, especially his wife is, I think, heavily pregnant, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I think she's like very close to having a baby. So to trade that guy, who's a local guy from Ottawa now in that situation, that would be kind of a tough one to swallow. So I'd like to see them hang on to Boro.
Yeah, and the story from when they were in Vancouver and he clotheslined that guy who was trying to break into that car. That's exactly why you want Boro sticking around.
I'm mad because I didn't get one of those shirts. I'm waiting for one to pop up on eBay so I can snag it.
And finally, we've got, you mentioned earlier you can't see him sticking with the team past this season. Craig Anderson, upcoming UFA. Do you think the Senators could get anything in return for Andy?
Oh, without a doubt, I think they could. I think there are tons of teams that are desperate for goaltending. Look at the Leafs. Like, they've got nothing. Michael Hutchison starting against Ottawa tonight. You know, now that I said that, he's going to get a shutout. But, I mean, the Leafs, their goaltending is so bad. They have no depth. So if you trade them Anderson, that gives them a little bit of breathing room. I still don't think they're going to go very far. But I think there would be a lot of teams that would be looking to supplement their goaltending depth with Anderson. Florida's another one. It's a good fit, aside from the cap situation. Anderson being, having played in Florida. I think he lives in Florida a lot in the summers or something, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I definitely think you could get something for Anderson, and I don't think, and like I said, I don't think he'll be with the team past the season. But if you can get something for him at the deadline, then you got to do it.
If the Senators were to trade Craig Anderson to the Toronto Maple Leafs, would that be enough, dare I say it, to make you almost cheer for Toronto?
Absolutely not. Not even close. I love Andy. Like, Andy's got a special place in my heart. He's the best goaltender that the Sens have ever had. I remember, one of my most vivid memories as a fan of the Sens is I was at Game 5 against the Rangers in 2017 when they tied it in the last minute and Turris scored in overtime. I was there with my dad. And my dad, who hated me at the time because the Sens had just eliminated his Bruins. But, we were at the game, and Anderson, I think it was Kreider, came in on a breakaway, and Anderson made this huge save, and the whole crowd just erupted. Everybody was on their feet, and the Andy chant started. I looked next to me, and my dad, the lifelong Bruins fan since the days of Bobby Orr, is chanting Andy. And I'm like, I'll never forget that, right? So Andy's got a special place in my heart, but not enough to make me cheer for the Leafs.
And we teased it earlier, but it's now time for, in honor of episode Ceci, our 5 favorite moments of the season so far. We've both, before the show, written down our top 5 moments, and we're going to take turns revealing, starting with number 5, working our way down to number 1. Brandon, I'll let you start.
All right. So before I start, I want to give an honorable mention to 2 moments that I didn't quite make my list, but that I absolutely loved. One was actually just last week. I know we're not we kind of frown upon glorifying fighting these days, but that Tkachuk Subban tilt was awesome. That was a cool moment, especially with all the history Subban has in Ottawa. So that was awesome. And the Tkachuk versus Lawton, when Tkachuk jumped Lawton against the Flyers, that was, was it the most clean thing that's ever happened? No, but I would be lying if I said I didn't love it. So with that said, I'll go to my number 5, and in keeping with the theme of Brady Tkachuk, I got to go with his overtime winner against Montreal.
Tierney for Tkachuk, who's going to break in. Brady Tkachuk and scores! Tkachuk wins it for the Senators in overtime.
Showing that sudden burst of speed that I don't think any of us saw coming. Nice little move on the breakaway to end the game in Montreal. It doesn't get any sweeter than that. So that's my number 5.
All right, my number 5 is from December 23rd, the final game before Christmas against Buffalo. The Sens got the 3-1 victory, all because of Craig Anderson's save versus Buffalo when the puck came behind the net and he put his glove just behind him laying on the goal line.
On Rodriguez, yeah.
On Rodriguez, and then immediately following that, I think it was Borowiecki just fucking destroyed one of the Sabres.
Wood shot by Gergensen's behind him. Oh, backstroke save. How did that stay out? A Cirque du Soleil job by Craig Anderson.
Yeah, it was. I was recapping that game, so I was watching that one really closely, and I jumped out of my seat when he made that save. I couldn't believe it. But yeah, you're making me look bad. You got the dates. I'm like, I didn't put that much. I'm looking all unorganized now.
Well, I just wanted to reference it just because I thought that it being the last game before Christmas added something to it, and he made 43 out of 44 saves, so that's just his best performance of the season.
It definitely was his best performance of the season. And that was after he had 5 games off too, and I think he had a .977 save percentage in that game. He was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, so if you want to jump to number 4.
In a second, I just wanted to make one more point because that game was following Hogberg's unbelievable overtime performance against the Flyers, where he made 4 or 5 10-bell saves. Mm-hmm. And then going into the Buffalo game, I was like, shit, I really wish Hogberg was playing tonight.
Me too.
When is Anderson ever going to make an unreal save like that? And then he proved me wrong, so that added to it.
Yeah, those performances from Andy have been few and far between this year. I didn't think I thought Ottawa was going to lose that game 100% too, just even before it started. But Anderson, he proved us all wrong, and Tkachuk and Pajot had really good games that game too. Oh my God, that was some of their best games of the season. Do you want to go ahead now?
Yeah, go on to number 4.
Cool. I just didn't want to step on you, but. So number 4 for me is Shabbat to Duclair against Detroit.
Taro Hirose and Brendan Perlini. Perlini picked up his first point as a Red Wing, and Duclair in on goal. What a move! What a goal! Anthony Duclair with his 8th goal of the season.
Where they had the shades of Erik Karlsson pass and to Mike Hoffman, and Duclair went in and scored on the breakaway. I'd be lying if I had said that didn't give me a little bit of a painful flashback to the Boston series, but to see these 2 new young guys it was kind of symbolic to me of Shabbat maybe stepping into Karlsson's shoes, and Duclair, who I think is better than Hoffman. So it was just kind of a cool, compare contrast moment through Senators history. So that gets my number 4 spot.
And my number 4, don't worry, because before you asked me if you wanted to compare the number 5 so we didn't have too many similarities, and I said, nah, don't worry, because a few of mine are way out there. And 3-1 are going to be very different from yours. I'm confident from that. But number 4 for me was Tkachuk's overtime winner versus Montreal. So,
but yeah, that'll probably go down as my favorite moment of the season. I think no matter what happens, just hearing how pissed off the Bell Center crowd was and seeing them all flip off Brady as he was celebrating by the glass, I loved it. So yeah, number 3, this one was tough, but I had to go with the win against Calgary from a couple weeks ago, where Hogberg absolutely stood on his head. The Senators got dummied in terms of possession and shots on net. Huge win for Hogberg.
And how about poor Sam Bennett? I think Hogberg's going to get a piece of this right at the last minute. Look at the stick of Hogberg.
Laid the paddle down.
Lays it down and denies Sam Bennett.
A guy who's kind of struggled to find the win column in his career despite some great performances this year. So I think that one, especially being the Brady versus Matthew matchup, that was one of the cooler games of the year. And to see Hogberg get the win in a performance like that, I got to give it to him for my number 3.
Going with my number 3, we're going to Jonathan Davidson's NHL debut versus the Los Angeles Kings.
Ooh, good one.
And a lot of people are like, why do you like Jonathan Davidson so much? And I don't know why anymore. But I went to the Fan Fest back in September with my buddy Nathan, and we were watching the little practice before they do the inter-squad scrimmage. Mm-hmm. And Davidson just looked so good. He was like stealing pucks and blocking shots, and he just reminded me so much of Mark Stone. So every bit of me wanted that player that I was going to have replace Mark Stone as my favorite Ottawa Senator. So at that moment, I chose Jonathan Davidson, and Nathan bought the Abramov jersey, and so I bought the Davidson jersey. And the joke was we were both big fans of the Matt Duchene trade.
Oh, I'm a fan of that trade now too. Yeah, I love Davidson. I think Mark Stone is a bit of a stretch, but I definitely think he's going to be a key guy going forward in that bottom 6 type of role. He's just such a good skater. That was one of the things that really blew me away when he got his first stint in Ottawa this year. Was I had no idea that he could skate like that. I was in the Dominican Republic for that game, so I didn't get to really watch it. But I caught up on it after, and I watched like what bits and pieces I could with the crappy resort Wi-Fi. But I love him as a player. I love how quick he is. He's relentless on his forechecks. He's gonna be a bottom 6 fixture, I think, in the future.
Yeah, and just to close out my thought on my number 3, the morning that it was announced that he had been called up and they would be in the lineup, Nathan sent me a Snapchat. He's like, "You got to go to this game, Woodsy." And I bought the tickets, and me and a couple buddies, Curtis Hayden and Braden Otway, we went to the game, and then his first shift he lined up against Ilya Kovalchuk, so that was sort of a cool moment for him. And then Peugeot got the overtime winner, so that was awesome.
Peugeot swats it down the boards, cuts to the middle. Peugeot, stopped by Campbell, rebound, score.
Yeah, that was a fun game. I like I said, I caught up on it after when I got back, and that was one of the ones I was sorry I missed. It's funny you mentioned Peugeot, though, because he is actually the owner of my number 2 moment. We know he had 2 hat tricks in his career, but they were both in the playoffs. So even though he had two hat tricks in some of the biggest games in Senators history, he had never been credited for a regular season hat trick, and he finally got one this year in New Jersey against the Devils. It was a hell of a performance. He kind of did it all himself that game. So Peugeot's the owner of my number 2 moment for what's technically his first career hat trick.
Back to Taylor Hall. Hall got a feather one in. Peugeot down and scores. Make it a hat trick for Peugeot.
Going on to my number 2, Marcus Hogberg's sequence of saves in overtime against the Detroit Red Wings.
Bertuzzi right to the front of the goal himself.
Oh.
Across.
Oh,
And Dumpler
there it is.
Another try. Oh, he couldn't get it. Green. Oh, somehow. Green again.
Oh, my
The
God.
goalpost.
Are you nuts?
Oh, Mike Green hit the goalpost.
Yes.
The first one was like from the left side of the net. He gets the paddle over on it. Then he makes another save that hits him, and then the rebound, like when he was sprawled out from the paddle save. The amount of space he had to cover to get his glove over to the left side of the net in such a short amount of time. That's one of my favorite cross-crease glove robbery saves of all time. And then I think it was Filppula hitting the post after that. Yeah, so there was like 3 unreal saves.
Jump on Colin White.
I texted my father the next day. I'm just like, did that actually happen? I've never seen anything so unbelievable.
I saw somebody quote tweeted it when it happened. It said the Red Wings' entire season in one sequence. Like, I guess that's what just been Detroit fans have been dealing with all year. But no, that one was just the absurdity of it. I couldn't believe it. Like, he was sprawled on top of Colin White, and he somehow gets across to make the save. Like, that was unbelievable. Hogberg. I mean, I was tempted to give him a few more of my top moments, but I'm like, he hasn't been up for very long. I kind of got to spread it out across the season, but that's a good one. That's a good one.
All right, what is your grand reveal for your number 1 moment?
So my grand reveal, drumroll sound effect and all that, is Anthony Duclair's hat trick against the Blue Jackets.
Moves to the middle a little more for Duclair. Scores! Anthony Duclair, the hat trick.
That was, you couldn't write that one any better. Comeback victory. Duclair scores the hat trick winner in overtime, just a bomb from the top of the circle. And especially considering that was his old team and Tortorella's comments, like, you can't write it any better than that. So that was probably the moment where I've cheered the hardest all season, was when he scored that goal in overtime. Like, it doesn't get any better than that. So I got to go with Duclair as my number one moment of the season so far.
I took a screenshot of John Tortorella's reaction after the goal, and I just that's one of my favorite moments too. I was considering including either of the hat tricks because it seems like forever that it's been since the Ottawa Senators have had a hat trick in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
And
goals have been hard to come by.
Every other team, like you see, like they get hat tricks all the time. Like I don't know if there's a statistic anywhere, but I feel as if Ottawa, since the days of Alfie Spezza and Heatley, since like 2009, I'd say Ottawa is probably very low in the league in like total hat tricks.
That's probably fair to say. One thing I do want to mention about Torch, though, because, like, man, I feel like he gets a bad rep for the whole Duclair thing because everybody remembers that he said, I don't think he knows how to play, right? But he also said that a lot of coaches have been sticking with this guy because we believe there's something at the end of this tunnel, right? So, like, it wasn't as if he totally wrote off Duclair. I think that was a nice little soundbite for the media, but I mean, I don't know. That's one thing that always kind of sticks in my craw because I like Torts. You know, as far as other coaches go, he's up there on my list of favorites. But yeah. So, and I think he was right too. I think the trade to Ottawa kind of vindicated him because he said he thought there was something at the end of this tunnel. Like he thought Duclair could play, and now he has. Right? He's been unbelievable in Ottawa so far. So I got to give a little shout out to Torts there.
I'm gonna give a little shout out to Torts in a moment when we go through our NHL midseason roundup.
Oh boy!
But first off, my number one moment of the season. Get the 10-ply out because I'm going soft on this one because it's got a personal connection for me. On December 9th, the Senators beat Boston 5-2 in what was one of their strongest performances of the season. And December 9th is also the day that I asked Adriana to be my girlfriend. So
there you go.
That's the one. So she was watching that game with me, and she probably fell asleep at some point. But that was fun for me to watch the boys put on a clinic and beat such an elite team in Boston with the 5-2 win.
Oh, I love it. My girlfriend's a Bruins fan. Actually, it's funny because my family's Finnish, right? That's where Maki comes from. The name's Finnish. And she always tells me I'm her second favorite Finlander because she loves Tuukka Rask so much. So that was a fun night for me, too. I'll give you the 10-ply for that one, but I can't argue with it. That's pretty solid.
All right. Well, that was fun in honor of Cody Ceci, wrapping up the top 5 moments of the season so far for the Sens. And we've talked a lot about the Sens, but every episode I like to talk about everything else going on in the NHL as well. So starting off the midseason roundup, who has been the most surprising team so far?
I think I got to go with Washington. Like, I think everybody expected them to be good, but I don't think anybody expected them to be leading the league at any point, you know? Especially with their goaltending situation, the fact that, I don't know if it's pronounced Samsonov, like Gord Miller was pronouncing it Samsonov last night. But he's been the fact that he's kind of overtaken Holtby as the starting goaltender, at least the goaltender of the future in Washington. You know, it may not be a popular choice, but I got to go with the Capitals.
For me, I'm going with Columbus. Here's where I get my Tortorella shout out. My preseason bold prediction was that the Columbus Blue Jackets would make the playoffs, which was really bold considering everybody had them near the bottom with Panarin, Duchesne, Zingle, and Bobrovsky leaving. But I have so much faith in Tortorella. He's won the Jack Adams before, and I think he's got to be my pick if the Blue Jackets make the playoffs this year for him to win it again because they were just depleted roster, and they're performing so well.
He's got to get it.
Who has been the biggest disappointment so far this season?
Oh, I think it's going to be unanimous. San Jose, right? Like, that was a team that I was looking at to win the cup. I honestly thought if San Jose was healthy and they got to the finals against the Bruins, that they were going to win. And I thought the Bruins were going to beat St. Louis. So maybe take that for what you will. But yeah, so even losing Pavelski, you know, you look at that roster and you got guys like Erik Karlsson, Evander Kane, Logan Couture, Brent Burns. It's hard to see how I don't think anyone imagined that team would bottom out like they have. Their garbage goaltending aside, I don't think anyone foresaw it affecting them the way it has. So I don't know. Maybe you disagree, but I've got to go 100% with San Jose.
I actually am going to disagree, and humble brag here, not a big deal. But I had the Sharks missing the playoffs, and as of right now, if the playoffs started today, I'd have 6 of 8 teams in the East in my playoff predictions making the playoffs, and 7 of the 8 in the West. So there hasn't been too many surprises for me.
Who'd you have making the playoffs over San Jose?
I had St. Louis, Colorado, Dallas, Vegas, Arizona, Vancouver, Nashville, and is that 7? I don't know.
No, regardless, that's an extremely fuego take. Thinking San Jose wouldn't make the playoffs, but good for you, man. Like, what made you think that, if you don't mind?
Just because of all the injuries they had in the final stretch of the playoffs last year, everyone was going down. It made me think that they were a little bit soft, and Joe Thornton is getting up there a lot in age, and their goaltending is absolutely abysmal. So I did not trust their goaltending to get them in the playoffs.
Well, good for you, because I didn't see that one coming at all.
Yeah, but for my biggest disappointment, I think I'm going to go with Nashville, just because they added Duchesne, and that was a huge addition for them. Mm-hmm. And it's just hilarious wherever Duchesne goes, they just drop the ball.
I'm just glad it happened to somebody else after it happened in Ottawa, because if it had kind of ended with Ottawa and Duchesne goes on to win a cup this year, I'd be like, come on.
Yeah, and Nashville's only 3 points out of a wild card spot with 3 games hand on Arizona, and they had the coaching change, so they could very well make it and go on a stretch, because Duchesne was actually very impressive in the playoffs last year with Columbus, so I wouldn't be surprised. But so far, I just think that they've been a disappointment.
For sure, I gotta agree. Duchesne, especially this year, he was better statistically at this time last year in Ottawa than he is this year in Nashville, with a far better team around him. So I don't know, maybe it's a system thing, but I definitely see why you think they've been a surprise.
Who has been the most fun team to watch for you so far this year besides Ottawa?
I admittedly don't get to watch many games outside of the Senators, just because, there's only so many hours in a day. And I think if I watch any more hockey, my girlfriend's going to kill me in my sleep. But I've loved watching Colorado. They've got so much high-end talent that they've just been a treat. There's always been something about Vegas that I've really liked watching ever since they came into the league. They just play kind of this exciting, fast-paced game that I like. There's a lot of passion, especially in their home games with their fans. And a guy like Mark Stone just adds to that, right? So I think those two teams have been really fun to watch. If I had to flip a coin and pick one, I'd probably go Vegas, just because I'm biased and I still love Mark Stone.
Yeah, that's a good pick. I love watching Vegas, not only because the on-ice product is good, but just the in-arena experience, and you can always hear their announcer whenever Vegas scores. He's probably the best PA announcer in the NHL.
I really want to go to a game in Vegas. It looks like so much fun.
I almost went to Game 3 against San Jose last year. I had the choice. I had already purchased tickets for April 14th. My friend Seth and I went to a concert in Toronto that night. It was just like a up-and-coming band from California.
Gotcha.
But the same night was the Game 3 in Vegas, and my father was willing to split the bill with me, and I could take a friend, and that was the one that Mark Stone got the hat trick. So.
I was going to say,
so
do you regret that choice, or do you stick with it?
I stick with it because I told my buddy I'd go with him, and we had a really great time at the concert. It was the best show I've been to. The band, they're called the Swimmers, SWMRS, and 2 of the members in the band, they're the son of Billy Joe Armstrong. So,
Okay, I think I've heard of them, but I'm not too familiar. Yeah.
yeah. For me, the most fun team to watch, you mentioned your girlfriend being upset with you if you were to watch any more hockey. So when we started dating, I had to cut back because I have like a file on my iPhone where I keep track of every game I've watched this year, and I'm up to 124. And
Wow.
I've seen like 17 Vegas games, 16 Vancouver games. So those are 2 really fun teams to watch. But ever since the New York Rangers called up Igor Shesterkin.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but I was fascinated when they called him up because he was Craig Button's #1 ranked prospect in the world, and his numbers from the KHL were absurd. And the one Belleville game I made it to this season was against Hartford, and I saw him in net, and they went to the shootout, and Ottawa got the win in that game, or sorry, Belleville. But
Yeah.
yes.
I got my B-Sens jersey. I got one of the red barber pole ones now, so I gotta get out to a game when they play the Marlies. I'm probably gonna get beat up, but I want to get out to see them play the Marlies.
Those sweaters are clean. But yeah, so when he called up, I added him on my fantasy team because goalies, I'm first place in the league, but goalie's been a weak spot for me all year, so I had nothing to lose. And he's like 3-1 now, and he's just he's the real deal. And my girlfriend, she likes the Rangers are the one team besides the Sens that she'll watch because of Igor. So love watching the Rangers games. And finally, you said you thought that Boston, if you had to pick anyone right now, would win the Cup. Who do you see coming out of the West if you had to make a Cup Finals prediction?
Last year, I unequivocally thought Vegas was coming out of the West, and I still wholeheartedly believe if they hadn't got jobbed in Game 7, that they would be coming out of the West. I think it's going to be an arms race that we see. I think the deadline is going to play a huge factor in who goes where. I think one of the dark horses is if Arizona makes the playoffs, I think they could make a run at it. I don't think they'll win, but I think they're a dark horse pick. If I had to pick now, I'd probably say Vegas, just because that team always finds another level in the playoffs, right? Even in that San Jose series where they kind of fell apart near the end, they were dominant in that Game 7 before that 5-minute penalty, right? So if I had to pick one today, I would pick Vegas. I think Mark Stone's just going to put that team on his back. I think Fleury's going to be a brick wall, and Vegas comes out of the West.
I'd love to see it, and one thing I'd also love to see is you mentioned Arizona, and that's a hell of a bold pick. But I would love to see a battle of the desert in the playoffs.
Me too, yeah.
Florida, when they made the playoffs a few years ago and won the division, and they had that whole Kevin Spacey thing going on, they were able to fill the building in Florida, which was unheard of at the time. Whenever Florida makes the playoffs, they sell it out, which is weird. So you could even see Arizona maybe getting a sellout crowd if they had the Battle of the Desert in the playoffs. That'd be a fun series.
Well, remember
to watch.
they went to the conference final the year. I think it was the first year LA won the Cup. I think in 2012. And they were doing were they doing the whiteouts at the game? I feel like they were. They were doing the.
That would make sense. Yeah.
They were either doing the whiteouts or the sandstorm or whatever they called it, But yeah, like that was fun to watch. It's so cool to see what it does for the game when teams like that succeed, right? Like everybody kind of rags on those teams that like Arizona and like Florida that struggle to put, asses in seats. But to me, it's so good for the game when those teams are doing well. That's why I was really glad when Vegas made the final a couple of years ago. It's growth of the game, right? Like we want more people to like our sport. So I would love to see Arizona do really well again. A Vegas Arizona conference final would be nuts. It'd be so good for the game of hockey.
And Arizona, it's easy to forget that they got Phil Kessel in the offseason and that they've added Taylor Hall now, and they have so many exciting young players like Clayton Keller, and they added Derek Stepan a few years ago in the Antti-Ranta trade, and now they've got Darcy Kemper, and Aiden Hill is like their third string goalie, and he's putting up great numbers. So they have so much depth and that's why I had them making the playoffs this year.
And they haven't even been healthy all year. That's the crazy thing, right? Like, so if they can get healthy, they're really going to make some noise.
They had the most man games lost in the NHL last year at injury too, so they're a fun team to watch. I've watched a couple games, and just with the star players they have in Hall and Kessel, watching them go against Vegas, I like what you've done there. And now we're on to the final portion of the episode as we approach the 1 hour mark. So we're right on pace for the perfect episode length for a podcast. I like to have it clock in around the hour mark. No offense to Matt Bosty, who was on episode Phillips, and we cranked out a 2 hour and 15-minute episode.
I was like, this guy's going to make me talk for 2 hours? Are you kidding me? I'm like, what am I going to do for 2 hours? But I thank you, because I was saying Bosty for the entire time that I've been on Sens Twitter. So I just found out that it's Bosty. So Bosty, if you're listening, sorry, buddy.
All right. So we're going to get emotional here. We've got some emotional memories that we're going to bring up. Do you remember the first Sens game you watched?
I don't remember the exact specific game, but I started watching the Sens, and this is what really got me into hockey. My dad visited his friend in Ottawa, who's a phenomenal guy and has Senators season tickets. But he took my dad to a game because they were playing the Bruins, and my dad came back and he had a copy of Score magazine, the game day publication, and he gave it to me. So, and I just kind of read through it, and he was teaching me about all these players like Mike Fisher, who became my favorite player. And, he played in Sudbury a little before my time. Well, I was born, but I was very young. But yeah, so it was then that I kind of picked up on the Sens, and that was January of 2007. So that was the year they made the run to the final. So that was my first kind of year as a Sens fan. So yeah, I don't remember the exact specific game, but I remember the moment when my dad handed me the magazine, and I was hooked from there.
That's cool that we started watching around the same time, because my first game that I watched was Game 3 versus Anaheim, the one that they won. So it was a good time.
I remember that game.
Good time to start watching. Is there a single moment that made you become a Sens fan? I guess you said the magazine, but was there a moment that got you hooked, that made you stick around?
I think the deeper that the playoff run went that year really got me hooked. There's one moment I remember. I mentioned that Fisher is my favorite player, right? So I remember Game 1 against Buffalo. It had just started, and I had just had karate practice. So my dad brought me home from karate. We put the TV on, and I'm standing in front of the TV before I get changed, and it's just a couple minutes into the game. So I'm standing there in my gi, and this is when the Senators are shorthanded, and Fisher goes in on the breakaway. And I remember little 8-year-old me jumping up and down, yelling, "Come on, Mike! Come on, Mike! Come on, Mike!" And then he went in and scored, right? And I just freaked out. So that was a big moment for me. I'll never forget that one.
Vanek is so tough to handle, hovering in front. Fisher makes the steal, and he's in solo. Fisher waltzing in. He scores! Mike Fisher!
In tradition here for episode Ceci now, what is your favorite Cody Ceci memory?
It's got to be when he passed the puck to the guy with no stick against Anaheim a couple of years ago. I remember it happening, and I was streaming it, right? So I kind of rubbed my eyes, and I'm looking at, that just happened? And then I kind of rewind it, and I'm like, yeah, it did. And I remember tweeting, I'm like, before I even checked my feed, I tweeted and I said, did Ceci just pass the puck to a guy with no stick? And when I looked at my actual feed, that was just it. Like, that was my entire Twitter feed, was Cody Ceci passing the puck to a guy with no stick. So I think nothing is more appropriate to summarize his time in Ottawa than that.
What is your favorite Sens goal of all time?
So there's a lot. I mentioned the Fisher goal there. That was a big one for me. Alfredsson's goal to send them to the final. I remember that one really well. I think if I have to go with one, because it was the one I was at, it was Turris's goal in 2017, Game 5 against the Rangers.
Turris in the zone with a shot blocked by Girardi. Second chance. He scores! Kyle Turris wins it in overtime.
Because I remember, overtime started, and my dad looked at me and he said, who do you think is going to score the goal? And I said, Turris. And for whatever reason, I just said Turris. And he said, well, who from the Rangers? And I said, no, Turris is going to score. They're going to win. And the Rangers had their goal that got waved off the high stick. And then we were sitting behind the Ranger net, right? We were about, I guess, a little over halfway up. But so we were right behind the Ranger net when Turris came in. His first shot got blocked, and he got the second chance, and he scored. And I've never heard a building that loud in my life. Like, that game, I'll never forget that as long as I live. So it's got to be the Turris goal for me.
What's your favorite Sens game of all time?
So I would go with that one, but I'll change it up a little bit. I think this one's tricky. I think if I have to go all-time favorite game, it's the one you mentioned before. It's Game 3 of the final in 2007, because that was the one game I was like 8, right? So like that was the one game that I was allowed to stay up and watch because it was on a Friday night or a Saturday night or something like that. So that was the one game of the final that I stayed up and watched the whole thing. And I remember Fischer scored on the beautiful deflection and just the atmosphere of the crowd, like, and the fact that they won, right? Like that was such a big game to win, even though they ended up losing the rest of the series. So, but yeah, that I gotta go with Game 3 against Anaheim.
Have you ever met any NHL players or celebrities?
So I got a good story for that one. I've met a lot, but I've met Doug Gilmour, and I have Don Cherry's autograph. And a bunch of the Sudbury guys, Derek McKenzie, Andrew Burnett, who are both from Sudbury. They're both assistant coaches in Florida now. But I'll keep connected to the Sens. The first game that I ever went to was November of 2007, so it was the 07-08 season. For my birthday gift that year was my parents took me and my little brother to a game. My brother's a Leafs fan. So we went to see them play the Bruins. I believe it was November 2nd of 2007. And so Fischer, that game, obviously, again, Fischer being my favorite player, he scored the first goal, scored the winning goal, then was the first star of the game. And the first goal was like his 200th career point or something like that. So after the game, my dad takes us down into this little room, and there's a bunch of kind of old players pouring in. So I'm like, what the heck's going on here? So my dad had a connection. My dad coached Derek McKenzie, who's actually good friends with Fischer. So they set it up secretly that I was going to get to meet Fischer after the game. So I got to meet Mike Fischer. That night, we also met Foligno, Wade Redden, Jason Spezza, and Chris Neal. But I mean, little 8-year-old me meeting Mike Fischer, I still have the picture of me just staring at him wide-eyed while he like signs my Ottawa Senators calendar or whatever. So that was awesome. And the best part about it was my little brother was in that room wearing his Leafs t-shirt because he's a knob. So he goes up to Chris Neal and asks for an autograph wearing his Leafs t-shirt, and Neal just kind of looks at him like, I don't know. And they were playing with him. So he goes up to Spezza and asks for an autograph, and Spezza has my brother's mini stick and he pokes him in the belly with it. He goes, but you got to get rid of that shirt though. So that was great. That was one of the coolest moments of my life. Getting to meet all those guys, and just, they say don't meet your heroes, but all those guys were phenomenal, especially Fischer. Huge credit to him. He's a class act, and he made a little 8-year-old's life that day. So
I've heard some awesome Mike Fischer stories over the years, so that's cool that you brought him up. And one interesting piece of trivia that just for the show I'm going to ask you, do you remember when he got traded, what your reactions were, and do you remember who the Sens got for him?
Oh, of course I remember. I remember like I was basically in tears as my school day ended. I don't remember who they got for him. Did they get a second for him?
They got
I think that
a first-round pick and a second-round pick in 2011. So
yeah, I knew they got a second, but I didn't know who else they got. Oh, that's cool. They got a first for him. I forgot that they got a first for him.
Unfortunately,
I mean, rightfully so. He's one of in my opinion, one of the most criminally underrated players that played. Like at his peak, he was easily one of the best two-way forwards in the game. So,
their story was a first and a third.
First and a third.
I read it wrong, but the tragic part is the first round pick was Stefan Nason, and the third round pick was Jared Maidens, who had to retire because of injuries. I believe he had a concussion.
I knew I should have done this podcast. But that's painful. That just
like a first.
Mean, it was. We took solace in the fact that that he was able to go to Nashville and be with Carey, right? But what's cool is actually probably my most prized part of my jersey collection. I have a Mike Fisher captain Nashville Predators jersey with the Stanley Cup final crest on it. So at least something good came out of that. But it was fun to watch him in Nashville. Nashville was kind of my second favorite team while he was there. They were fun to watch on their playoff runs. So the Fisher trade's always a tough one to swallow, but I mean, like I said, good came out of it, I guess.
And finally, who, in your opinion, should episode 6 be named after?
Oh, it's got to be Redden. Come on. Who's a more famous number 6 in Ottawa than that?
We could go with Dennis, or should I say Chris Weidman.
Chris Weidman.
And just instead of like putting a highlight at the beginning of the episode when I introduce it of him scoring a goal, just put the entire Uber video.
The Uber video would be great. Yeah, it's got to be Redden for me though. I mean, just he played so long in Ottawa. Didn't have the most ceremonious end to his career, but I think if you're going like most iconic players, you gotta go Wade.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm probably leaning that way. And sorry if you're listening, Bosty, that I didn't go with Sammy Salo, but I couldn't find any clips on YouTube from a goal from his time in Ottawa.
Of course you can't. That's the most bossy thing to say ever. Pick Sammy Salo.
But so we're going with Ceci, and got to go with the clip from his first NHL goal, the overtime winner against St. Louis, to close us off. But thanks for joining us, Brandon, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, man. I loved it. You got to come on mine now sometime.
I'm looking forward to it.
Line. Wanders in. Phillips goes to the net. Turris is shot. The puck's high in the air.